The sun was hot on my shoulders that Saturday afternoon, and I was carrying a tray of fresh hamburgers toward the patio when I heard my father's voice cut through the laughter. I froze mid-step, the warm plate trembling slightly in my hands. $50 says she comes crawling home by Christmas, my dad announced to my brothers, his voice dripping with confidence. Broken, and ready to learn a real lesson about the world. My brothers, Tyler and Dean, erupted into laughter that felt like needles in my chest. The backyard seemed to spin around me. I stood there, invisible between the grill and the fence, while the people I loved most turned my dreams into a punchline. My hand gripped the tray tighter. Grease dripped onto my shirt. Nobody noticed me standing there. That moment changed everything. My name is Tessa Morgan, and I was the middle child in a family that only knew how to value one thing: money. My father, Michael Morgan, built his construction company from nothing. He was proud of that fact. He told the story constantly. My older brother Tyler followed in his footsteps at 19. My younger brother Dean did the same at 18. But I was different. I wanted to design buildings, not just construct them. I wanted to create spaces where people could dream, live, and grow. My father called this impractical. My brothers called it a waste. So I watched from the edges while they built their empire with their hands. I sketched mine on paper. For years, I drew alone in my room, filling notebook after notebook with architectural designs. My father once walked in during one of my sketching sessions and laughed. "Playing with pictures again, I see," he had said. That was the day I decided things had to change. 2 weeks after the barbecue bet, my father called me into his home office. The room smelled like old leather and decisions that had already been made. He was sitting at his massive wooden desk when I entered, and he didn't look up. "You're not joining the company," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. He finally looked at me, and his expression hardened. "Then you're on your own," he continued. My mother stood in the doorway behind me, quiet and sad. My father opened his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. His pen moved across the paper with sharp, angry strokes. He wrote out a check for $200 and slid it across the mahogany surface. "That's it," he said. "That should get you started in the real world. Now you'll see how your dreams feed you." I took the check with shaking fingers and walked out of his office, tears burning my eyes but refusing to fall. That $200 felt like both an ending and a beginning. My apartment was barely bigger than my childhood bedroom, and it smelled like mildew and broken hopes. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing through them almost every night. The rent ate up most of my paycheck from the diner where I worked as a waitress. My feet ached by the end of each shift. But I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to. The kitchen had one working burner, and the bathroom had a shower that only ran cold water. But there was a table by the window where I could spread out my sketches. That table became my sanctuary. Every night after my shift, I would collapse onto my bed for a few hours, then wake up and draw by the light of a single lamp. I sketched buildings that didn't exist yet. I studied architecture books borrowed from the library. I attended community college during the day, taking classes on design and building systems. My mother called once to check on me. "Your father says you'll come running back," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Instead, I hung up and drew harder. The first semester of community college nearly broke me. My professor, Dr. James Harrison, was a man who believed in telling the truth, even when it hurt. During my first design review, he looked at my work and shook his head. "You have vision," he said. "Real vision. But you have no foundation to support it." The words felt like a punch. I walked home that night and cried harder than I had since I was a child. I sat in my mildew apartment and questioned everything. But the next morning, I woke up and decided that I would build my own foundation. Literally. I started constructing cardboard models. I stacked milk crates. I used scrap materials from construction sites. I built and failed and rebuilt again and again. By the end of that semester, my final design project won a small campus competition. The prize was $200 and a certificate. I looked at that certificate and thought about my father's $200 check. This felt different. This was earned. My father called me after 2 years of silence. I knew it was him because his name flashed on my phone, and my heart stopped beating for a moment. I answered cautiously. "Your brother's getting promoted," he said without greeting or pleasantries. He was talking about Tyler. "He's running our new housing development site. We're expanding the company." He said this like it was information I should care about, like it was a trophy being held in front of my face. I said, "Tell him congratulations," and my voice stayed steady. He laughed then. Not a warm laugh. A cold one. "You still playing with your coloring books?" he asked. I didn't answer. He continued, "You should see the real world sometimes. Maybe you'd understand what actual work looks like." I hung up after that. I hung up the phone and made a promise to myself. I promised that the next project I created would make headlines. Not the headlines my father wanted. Different ones. Better ones. For the next 2 years, I lived on coffee and determination. I worked night shifts at the diner to pay rent. I attended classes during the day. I sketched late into the evening, sometimes until my fingers cramped so badly that I couldn't hold the pencil anymore. There were nights when I sat on my apartment floor and cried from exhaustion. There were mornings when I wasn't sure I could keep going. But I kept going anyway. My design, a modular, sustainable housing plan that could be built affordably, started to take shape. It wasn't just beautiful. It was possible. It was practical. It was real. A classmate named Marcus looked at my blueprints one day and said, "Tessa, you could patent this design." I shrugged at the time. "Maybe one day," I told him. But I didn't believe in one day. I only believed in right now. I believed in the next line I would draw. The next problem I would solve. That's how you survive on almost nothing. You stop thinking about the future and just focus on the work in front of you. After I graduated from community college with my 2-year degree, I decided to apply to a university architecture program. It was a long shot. My grades were good, but my background was unusual. Still, I applied and got accepted. By then, I had saved enough money to move into a slightly better apartment. I also had my design portfolio ready. I approached 3 different construction firms with my affordable housing prototype. The first firm told me I was too young. The second said my design was interesting but unproven. The third didn't take the meeting at all. I walked home each time feeling crushed. But then I passed a billboard for Morgan Builders. It featured my father and my brothers standing proudly in front of a construction site. Underneath, the words read, "Family built. Family strong." I stopped and stared at that billboard for a long time. Then I whispered to myself, "I'll build something stronger." That day, I decided that this wasn't just about architecture anymore. It was about proving something. It was about showing that I could make it on my own terms. One rainy night, completely soaked and exhausted, I ducked into a coffee shop to escape the downpour. I was carrying my sketches everywhere by then, the pages starting to curl from getting wet multiple times. A woman in her 60s sat at a small table, and she kept glancing at the drawings spilling out of my bag. After a few minutes, she came over and introduced herself. Her name was Eleanor Briggs, and she was a retired architect who had designed several famous buildings in our region. "You have guts," she said, looking at my soaked portfolio. "Show me what you've got." I laid out my designs right there on the cafe table, nervous and shaking. She studied every page carefully. Her feedback was sharp but kind. She saw problems I hadn't noticed. She also saw potential I had almost stopped believing in. When she finished reviewing my work, she said something that changed my life. "I know someone," she told me. "A developer. He's always looking for fresh ideas. Let me introduce you." I felt my heart skip a beat. Eleanor brought me to a networking event 2 weeks later. The room was full of people in expensive suits, people who seemed to know each other already. I felt completely out of place. My best dress was from a thrift store. My shoes were worn at the heels. But Eleanor walked me directly to a man named Harold Crane. He was in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Eleanor introduced me as an architect with an innovative, sustainable housing design. Harold turned to me and said, "Show me." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my prototype drawings. I explained my concept, how it could reduce building costs by 40% while maintaining quality and sustainability. He studied the drawings silently for what felt like forever. Then he looked at me and said, "If you can build a working prototype, I'll back you financially." I stood there stunned. "Really?" I asked. He nodded. "Really?" That moment felt like someone had handed me the keys to my future. I worked like I had never worked before. I moved into a small studio space that Harold helped me rent. For 4 months straight, I barely left that space. I built a working prototype of my housing design. Every detail mattered. Every measurement had to be perfect. I used recycled materials where possible. I showed how the design could be mass-produced without losing quality. When the prototype was finally complete, I called Harold to come see it. He stood in front of my work for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "This is extraordinary." He signed the papers to fund my first pilot project that same day. I remember calling my mother after he left. I told her about the funding, about the project, about everything. She cried on the phone. She didn't tell my father, but she cried happy tears for me. That felt like real support for the first time in years. The first article about my project appeared in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Young Architect's Affordable Housing Design Gets Major Backing." There was a photo of me standing next to a model of my design. Within days, the article went online. Suddenly, people were emailing me. Universities wanted to interview me. Other developers wanted to see my designs. My inbox exploded with opportunities. But I noticed something painful. My family read that article. My mother liked it on social media, then unliked it a few hours later. I could tell my father had seen it because my mother mentioned that he had been quiet all week. Tyler sent me a text that just said, "Congrats, I guess." That was all. I realized then that my family wasn't going to celebrate my victories. They weren't going to believe in me. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. I stopped waiting for their approval. I stopped hoping they would understand. I just focused on my work. Construction on my first pilot project began 6 months later. I was on site every single day, wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots. I gave orders to experienced construction workers who were twice my age. Some of them didn't listen at first. But when they saw that I knew what I was talking about, when they saw that my designs actually worked, they started to respect me. One older worker named Frank said to me one morning, "Never seen a woman lead a crew like this before." I smiled and told him, "Well, get used to it." The project came in on budget and on schedule. When families moved into the first completed homes, I watched them walk through the doors and smile. An elderly man turned to me and said, "This is beautiful. Thank you." That moment meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. When news outlets covered the completion of the project, it made headlines across several states. The newspaper's front page featured a photo of me standing beside the mayor at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for my completed project. The headline read, "Architect from Small Town Breaks the Mold." The article described my journey, my vision, and my commitment to making housing affordable. They called me innovative. They called me brave. They called me successful. That same week, my father's construction company lost a major bid for a smaller housing contract. I didn't find this out from my family. I read it in the business section of the newspaper. The company that won the bid was using a design similar to one of my earlier concepts. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had built his entire business on tradition and doing things the old way. Now, the old way was becoming obsolete. New architects with new ideas were winning contracts. I wasn't happy about my father's struggles, but I wasn't sad about them either. It was simply the natural consequence of refusing to change. 6 years after that fateful barbecue, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice sounded nervous and hopeful at the same time. "Your father would like you to come home for dinner," she said carefully. "It's been too long. We miss you." I hadn't been home since the day he gave me that $200 check. 6 years of building a life without them. 6 years of proving myself. But I could hear something different in my mother's voice. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was sadness about the years we'd lost. "I'll come," I told her. "Tell him I'll be there." I didn't tell her that I had just accepted the biggest project of my career. I didn't tell her that my signature would soon be on something that would change our hometown forever. That would be a better conversation to have in person. I hung up the phone and smiled. They had no idea what was coming. I drove back to my hometown on a Saturday afternoon in my new electric car. The drive had taken me 5 hours from the city where I'd built my reputation. As I passed familiar landmarks, the old high school, the park where I used to play, my heart raced. I wasn't the same person who had left here. I wore a tailored business suit. My car was clean and new. My hands didn't have calluses from working double shifts. I had transformed myself. My father opened the front door when I arrived, and his expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession. Confusion, recognition, shock. "You look successful," he said awkwardly. "I made it work," I replied simply. My mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She had tears in her eyes. My brothers were there too, sitting in the living room with their wives. Everyone stood up when I entered, and nobody quite knew what to say. The room felt heavy with all the time we'd lost. During dinner, my father cleared his throat. He had that look on his face, the look he used when he was about to ask for something he wasn't sure he would get. "Tessa," he began carefully, "your mother told me about your recent projects. They sound impressive." I nodded but didn't say anything. "The thing is," he continued, "the city has put out a bid for a major development project. A new sports and community complex. Very prestigious contract." He paused, and I felt my stomach tighten because I knew exactly what was coming. "We were wondering if you might consider letting us work with you on something like that," he said. "You could design it. We could build it. Morgan Builders and Morgan Designs working together as a family." He smiled like this was the perfect solution. Like 6 years of pain could just disappear because of a business opportunity. I kept my face neutral. "Send me the details," I said politely. "I'll review the qualifications." Tyler and Dean exchanged excited looks. They thought they had won me over. They had no idea that I was already involved in that project. They had no idea that I was the one who would be evaluating their bid. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at City Hall. It was a long table filled with city officials and members of the development committee. I was the lead architect on this project, the one person whose vote carried the most weight. My father and brothers entered the room in their work clothes, carrying their portfolio and project samples. Dean saw me first and did a double take. "Tessa," he said, confused. My father's face went pale. I introduced myself formally to the committee. I'm Tessa Morgan, lead architect for this development project. I gestured toward my father and brothers. These gentlemen are Morgan Builders. They're one of several firms we're reviewing for the construction contract. My father's jaw actually dropped. He finally understood. I wasn't his daughter in this room. I was his judge. This wasn't a family favor situation. This was professional evaluation. I said calmly, "Please continue your presentation." The meeting lasted an hour. Morgan Builders gave their pitch. They talked about their experience, their track record, their reliability. But something was different now. I was listening like a professional, not like a family member. And I was hearing the truth. They were good, but they weren't the best option. 2 weeks later, the selection committee voted. Morgan Builders came in second. The contract went to a different company, a progressive construction firm led by women architects and project managers. My father called me the next day. He was furious. His voice shook with anger. "You rigged this," he accused. "You chose them because you wanted to punish us." I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "No, Father. I rewarded competence. The other company had a better plan, a better environmental record, and a more innovative approach to this specific project. They also have a stronger commitment to diversity and equal pay for equal work. As the lead architect, I have to make decisions based on what's best for the project and the community, not based on family loyalty." There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "You did this on purpose. You could have helped us." "I did help you," I said quietly. "I gave you an equal chance to compete. That's more than fairness. That's professionalism." He hung up after that. A month before the official groundbreaking ceremony, I hosted a fundraising gala for my affordable housing nonprofit organization. The event was held in the city's nicest hotel, and media outlets sent photographers and reporters. It was the biggest event of my career so far. I invited my family. I sent them formal invitations with front row reserved seating. I told my mother it was important that they be there. She asked if it meant I wanted to reconcile, and I didn't answer directly. I just said, "Be there." They came. My father wore his best suit. My brothers brought their wives. My mother had her hair done professionally. They arrived early and sat in their reserved seats, looking around at the elegant decorations and successful people mingling with champagne glasses. They probably thought this was about coming back together. They probably thought I had finally decided to forgive them and move forward as a family. They had no idea what was about to happen. As I prepared to take the stage, I could see them in the front row, smiling with pride now that I seemed to be succeeding publicly. I walked onto the stage as the spotlight found me. The room full of hundreds of people quieted down. I looked directly at my father and brothers in the front row before I began speaking. "I want to tell you a story," I said. 6 years ago, I attended a family barbecue. I overheard a conversation that changed my life. My father bet my brothers $50 that I would come crawling home within a year, broke and broken, ready to give up on my dreams. The room became completely silent. I saw my father's face go white. He didn't believe I could make it. He thought my dreams were impractical. My brothers laughed about it. But that moment taught me something important. Success doesn't require permission. It doesn't require approval from the people who doubt you. It only requires determination and belief in yourself. I paused and looked directly at my father. I'm here today to prove that dreams don't need permission to come true. I'm here to show that sometimes the people who doubt you the most can be the motivation you need to succeed. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. News outlets captured the entire moment. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The news spread through our hometown like fire. Everyone learned about the bet. Everyone learned that the successful architect they'd been reading about in the newspapers had been rejected by her own family. But the story didn't become one about revenge, it became one about perseverance. Local news outlets interviewed me and asked about my family. I answered honestly but kindly. My father did what he thought was best, I told one reporter. He wanted me to be practical. I wanted to be brave. We disagreed. But that disagreement led me here. Letters started arriving at my office. Most of them were from young women and girls. They wrote things like, "I want to be an architect now because of you. My father told me girls can't do math. Your story made me believe in myself. I'm going to college because I saw what you accomplished." I kept every single letter. These letters became more valuable to me than money. They proved that my success had meaning beyond just my personal achievement. I had accidentally become an inspiration to people who needed one. My father showed up at my office unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. My secretary tried to stop him, but I told her to let him in. He looked older than I remembered. His confidence was gone. He looked tired. "You humiliated me," he said without any preamble. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Dad." He sat. "You didn't humiliate you," I said quietly. "You did. The day you placed that bet. The day you told me my dreams were impractical. The day you cut me off financially and told me to see if my dreams would feed me. Those were your choices. I didn't do those things." He looked down at his hands. "I thought I was teaching you something," he said. "I thought I was preparing you for a hard world." "You were," I said. "You succeeded. But you did it by pushing me away instead of standing beside me. And now you have to live with that." He looked up at the walls of my office, at the framed architectural designs, at the awards and accolades, at the photos of buildings I had created. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father apologize. I didn't know what to say. Months passed after that meeting. My father didn't reach out again. But something had shifted. My mother started visiting me in the city. We had lunch together. We talked about the weather and my projects and her life. It was awkward at first, but it gradually became easier. She told me that my father was proud of me, even if he couldn't say it. She told me that Tyler and Dean had actually looked into the architectural field because they saw my success. "Maybe they won't be architects," she said, "but they're interested in what you've done. You've changed the way they think about possibilities." One day, I decided to establish a scholarship fund. I called it the Morgan Women in Design Award. I created it to help young women from low-income backgrounds pursue architecture and design education. On the application form, I wrote the story of my journey. I told applicants that this scholarship existed because someone didn't believe in me. I told them that sometimes the people who doubt you create the fuel you need to succeed. The first year, I gave scholarships to 12 young women. Each one of them wrote me a thank you letter, and I read every single one. The day of the grand opening arrived. The new sports and community complex stood complete, a stunning structure that combined modern design with environmental sustainability. My name was etched into a stone plaque at the entrance, designed by Tessa Morgan. Below that was another plaque, dedicated to everyone who was told they'd never make it. My father stood in the crowd with my mother, my brothers, and their families. I watched him read my name on that stone. I watched his expression shift as he understood what it meant. The building would stand for 50 years, maybe 100 years. Every person who walked into it would see my name. Every person would know that this space was created by someone named Tessa Morgan. That knowledge, that permanence, was more powerful than any apology. I turned away from my family and toward the crowd. Hundreds of people had come for the opening. Young girls stood with their parents, pointing at my name. Future architects, I thought. Future dreamers. That night, as I looked at the building I had created, I whispered to myself the same words I'd whispered years ago. I built something stronger. And I had. I had built something that would matter long after my father's company crumbled into dust. I had built my legacy, one design at a time.